Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today I want to talk about some recent statements made by Russell T Davies on David Tennant's new podcast. David Tennant does a podcast with. I listened to this podcast this morning and it was a very, very interesting listen. So we're going to be talking about a few of the things said in there, but I would highly recommend going and listening to the podcast yourself. It's on like all the main ones, Spotify, Apple Music, all of those. Very, very good listen. A lot of interesting stuff about like Russell T Davies's like own life, particularly stuff with regards to his husband that I found very touching. It's a very, very nice listen, and I would recommend it if you're into either of those men, which if you're watching this channel, you probably are, at least somewhat, let's be honest. Yeah, it's a very interesting listen. They talk a little bit about how they approached David with the role of the Doctor, and I found that very interesting as well. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the brand new figure for Doctor Who over on Character Options, and we're going to be talking about the speculation with regards to Ncuti Gatwa's future on the show. But let's just get right into it. So as I said, first of all, the thing we're basically taking all of this from is Russell T Davies, David Tennant does a podcast with, which again, I would highly recommend listening to, but of course, we're going to be taking the articles from various outlets, including Radio Times. Doctor Who's Russell T Davies said there are, quote, conversations about the next showrunner. The forthcoming season 15 will be Davies' second full run since returning to the helm. When the time came for former Doctor Who showrunner Chris Chibnall to pass over the reins, few predicted his replacement would be Russell T Davies, who made an unexpected return to the show several years after his previous stint. Now, with his second full season back at the helm approaching, some fans are already wondering who might be next in line for the top job. This was the topic that came up during Davies' recent appearance on David Tennant's podcast. After Davies joked on David Tennant does a podcast with that he, quote, won't go back for a third time at any point in the future, Tennant teased that he hadn't thought he'd go back for a second time either. That's very funny. I mean, technically he went back for 3 if you include the 50th. I honestly believe that if Tennant was asked at any point to go back, he would. I reckon he'd do it at 100. He'd be like, yeah, she'll get me the coat and I'll do it. Basically, like, you know that one scene in the Master Trilogy in Series 3? I think he could look like that and still want to do it, honestly. To which Davies responded, that's very true, but I'm not getting any younger, darling, Davies said. But I will need to slow down at some point, that'll come. Last time it was Stephen Moffat who replaced him. That wasn't even a day's work. Like, right, off you go. So this is the interesting thing about where Doctor Who finds itself at the moment. Unlike with the transition from Russell to Stephen, or even to a lesser extent, the transition from Stephen to Chris, there isn't an obvious successor. Obviously, with Russell to Stephen, Stephen was the obvious. You know, he'd written some all-timer episodes for the revived series. He was very well liked in the fan base, you know, everything he did was very well received. And he also had experience showrunning other things. So when it came to who was going to be the next showrunner, it was kind of a foregone conclusion at the time. And even with Chris, while I would say that his appointment isn't as obvious, because I wouldn't say that his Doctor Who contributions prior to him taking over are anywhere near as kind of universally beloved as Stephen Moffat's were, he did also write some fantastic Torchwood episodes, and just came off of Broadchurch, which was one of the most successful dramas for ITV at the time, so it was kind of logical that he would be the next step along. What's interesting at the moment is there isn't really a logical successor for Russell at the present moment. There isn't someone who A, has, you know, that much like writing experience writing Doctor Who, and B, someone who has a great deal of showrunner experience, with the possible exception of maybe one, which I'll get to. But yeah, it's interesting because obviously season 2, we're getting a bunch of new writers, which is good, and I'm always here for that. But we haven't really seen what they can do yet, so it's too early to really judge if any of them can be possible showrunner contenders. Obviously, some people will say that Juno Dawson obviously has written some Doctor Who spin-off material in the past, but I think that's very different from that and then showrunning the whole show. I think those are two different, you know, kettles of fish. I think if I had to pick someone who was most likely, I'd probably say at the moment Pete McTeague. Now, the reason I say he's the most likely is because he has a lot of experience not only writing for Doctor Who, obviously he did Kablam and Praxius, but he also was the one who did the collection box set trailers, Tales of the TARDIS. He's also an exec producer on War Between Land and Sea, I think. So if I had to put my money on anyone who is like the logical success, it probably would be him. I don't know whether I'd be that enthused by the prospect of a Pete McTeague Doctor Who era at the present moment for 2 key reasons. Number 1, I haven't been hugely keen on either of his Doctor Who episodes, unfortunately. And 2, I don't know whether his vision for the show would be distinct enough to carry like a new era on its own. Because I think he loves Doctor Who and I think he knows Doctor Who very well, but I don't know whether he would be the person to really shake it up and really alter what Doctor Who is, which is what I would argue Doctor Who needs at the present moment. He added, there's thinking about that, there's conversations about that, but it's hard, it's a tricky one, but they better exist. Imagine, I'm dead at my desk, the cliche would kill me. So I think this article reveals a couple of interesting things to us with regards to Doctor Who's potential future. Number one, Russell T Davies doesn't want to stay forever. I mean, I think that's kind of obvious, you know, no one's going to want to stay in the job for that long, and obviously the fact that they are looking for new people is good. It shows that, you know, there is thought going into that, there is an idea of succession, which I think is important. Of course, at present, there isn't anyone who I immediately go, oh yeah, they'd be great of the current crop. I have seen a lot of people suggest that, like, oh, we should get someone completely outside of the Doctor Who ecosystem, someone completely new, and I understand the appeal of that. I really do, but I do believe to a certain extent, in order to be showrunner, you have to be a fan to a certain degree, because Doctor Who is a very weird, unique show that I feel like you need to be a fan of to really run it. I feel like. That's just where I'm coming from. You might disagree on that. Obviously, there's always a lot of debate over whether being a fan of Doctor Who improves the performance of you as the Doctor, because obviously a lot of the best loved Doctors are fans of the show, obviously, for example, Tennant, Capaldi, etc. But there's also actors like Christopher Eccleston and Matt Smith who come into the show not knowing much about it and end up being fan favourites as well. So maybe you think that someone completely new could come in who does have any knowledge or really like familiarity with the show and really do something fresh with it. And I think that would be interesting, but I would be hesitant to say that we get someone completely outside of the Doctor Who system. I'd want them to at least be a fan, even if they've not worked on the show necessarily. But it is good that they're thinking about, you know, who is next. Because my kind of concern was that there is a risk that Russell T Davies ends up in a bit of a JNT situation where he is basically not allowed to leave. Not that he's not allowed, but he basically can't leave because if he does, the show ends because there isn't anyone to replace him. The fact that they are looking at, you know, future people is a sign against that. And it's also a sign that even after Russell leaves, there is a future in mind to a certain degree. Even if it's in its early stages, they do want a future to exist beyond this show. And Doctor Who Filming Locations makes the point that they believe this was recorded around late October because the stunt that they mention in War Between Land and Sea lines up with filming of around that time, which is an incredibly great spot. But I think it's interesting because obviously around that time we wouldn't have known what's going on with Disney then either, or at least, you know, we would assume that. But season 1 will have been out for an extended period of time. So it's interesting to know that in October 2024 there is still, you know, at least the idea that someone will replace Russell at some point. Again, I don't necessarily think that this is an indication that that will happen soon. I think the future is relatively up in the air, but I could at least see Russell seeing out 3. I think that's fairly likely, if not maybe 4, like his first run. But obviously, things like that move quickly, and you do have to start thinking about these things ahead of time. So, yeah. I'm glad that that thought is at least in place. And here's another thing that he said that I've sort of pondered before, but obviously this is like direct confirmation of it. Russell T Davies returned to Doctor Who to protect it amid the Disney deal. The showrunner has told David Tennant that the partnership with Disney was one factor behind his return. Showrunner Russell T Davies has said that one of the reasons for him to return to Doctor Who for his second stint at the helm was to protect the show during the early days of its partnership with Disney. Although, to be fair, at the time he was brought on board, there were talks with the BBC about bringing it to a streamer, but they didn't necessarily know which one. It wasn't necessarily Disney at that time, but basically what he said was he wanted to protect it in that transition. Davies, who originally served as showrunner between 2005 and 2010, was revealed as Chris Chibnall's successor in a shock announcement back in 2021, around a year before news emerged of a deal that has seen Disney Plus become the international home of the series. But speaking to David Tennant on the latest episode of the former Doctor Who Stars podcast, Davies admitted that discussions about a move to a big streaming service had been ongoing before he decided to rejoin the series. There was already a plan to shift it to a streamer. He said on David Tennant Does a Podcast With, I kind of thought it would need protecting, and that they were very honest and said to me, we're going to need a producer that can deal with 1,000 executives, which is what it's like. Pressed on why the BBC had felt the show needed a cash injection from a streamer to keep going, Davies added, that's what they wanted. He explained, it's not just the world we're living in. The former BBC director of drama Piers Wenger genuinely thought it deserves this budget. You're looking at Stranger Things and Star Wars shows and Marvel shows, and he said it should look like that, it deserves to look like that. I think that this is the true reason he came back. Less about, oh, you know, I'm going to come in and I'm going to save it, you know, from from cancellation, and more this sense of Russell, if you listen to what he says, is actually very skeptical of the streaming landscape and is very much a terrestrial TV viewer. He mentions it in the podcast that was out today. He said, I always have the TV on. I absorb all of television. I love the soaps. I love all of it. And he has been very critical in the past of streaming services and the streaming model. For example, he did an interview at like a university or a college, I believe, where he said how much better value BBC was when compared to HBO in terms of its programming and the variety and etc, etc. My point is, Russell is very much a traditional TV man. So I totally believe that he would have skepticism in joining up with a streaming partner, and would essentially want to guarantee that the core of Doctor Who remains what it is. I wonder if, to a certain degree, that desire for Doctor Who to retain its core somewhat led to a little bit of stagnation in terms of Season 1's general structure being pretty much identical to what it was in his first era. I wonder if maybe he should have allowed a couple more of those streaming elements to kind of play into it. Obviously, I'm not saying for a second you completely overhaul the show like they tried to do in the 90s with the TV movie, but what I am saying is maybe there is merit to some of those ideas being more incorporated. But at the same time, I think I am glad that someone with experience kind of came in to lead that transition over, even if it has been a bit rocky, and it's been a bit bumpy. I remember when the Midnight thing first got announced back in Season 1, and Russell was like, I know it's not ideal for everyone, and I'll still watch it at broadcast time, but, we're doing what we've got to do. I very much get the sense that that was kind of out of his hands, to be honest. He even said in a recent interview, I believe, that he wants the streaming bubble to kind of burst, so I don't really think he's a great fan of the streaming services, but he joined in essentially a bid to help that transition over, in a sense, which I think is a logical reason for him to come back, and makes a lot more sense than the much more kind of negative reading I've seen of just, he can't let go of the show, he won't let new people get on it, which I don't think is accurate. Turning to more speculative news now, it was posted by someone who worked on Doctor Who that they are now up for freelance work. They were a cameraman, I believe, on Doctor Who Unleashed, and they are now up for freelance work. So a lot of people kind of took this and went, ooh, that might not be a great sign, because, the fact that people are looking for work outside of Doctor Who after working on it for a couple of years might be an indication that it's not filming anytime soon. And whilst I think that that is a possibility, I don't know whether one person saying that they're back to freelance work is necessarily evidence of anything too cataclysmic. For one thing, I believe they worked on Doctor Who Unleashed, which is separate. It's a separate entity to the main show. It's produced by, I believe, a separate company as well. But the bigger piece of speculation came with this, which was Ncuti Gatwa removing the 15 from his bio in his Instagram. For context, he had a bunch of things in his bio, and people noticed that the 15, referring to his 15th Doctor, has been removed, and people sort of sounded the alarms and kind of went, oh my god, is this a sign that he's leaving? And again, while I do think that there's some merit to that reporting, I don't think this is necessarily evidence of that. And the reason I say that is, as pointed out by a friend of the channel, Jamie, just to temper people's expectations somewhat, I would like to point out that Ncuti cleared out his Instagram bio in general, even including his pronoun listing, well over a month ago. It's likely he wanted to tidy it out. He's also changed from actor to artist, so not worth overthinking. So yeah, honestly, it might just be a simple case of he's cleared out his Instagram bio, he's basically trying to, make it more professional, make it more streamlined, and that could honestly just be it. But I think it was just the double whammy of these two announcements back-to-back, or these two events back-to-back, that kind of got people's backs up. I think, as I said, I feel like I'm talking about this topic so frequently at the moment, but I think there probably is some merit to the fact that people in the Doctor Who offices don't really know what's going on yet, at least until Season 2 transmits. I think that's very much true, and I think it's probably also true that the uncertainty is causing some unease among production crew, staff, and maybe even the lead himself, Ncuti Gatwa. But I think these two things on their own are not enough as real solid evidence to that. If we start seeing Instagram posts like this en masse, then yeah, I'll start to be like, But one person, from Doctor Who Unleashed isn't necessarily, enough to be like, the show is not going to be made anymore. But I will say I do understand people's fears, and I will also say that it is a very uncertain time at the moment. Moving into some more positive news though, Character Options announced their next action figure for Doctor Who. This was their third Doctor online exclusive set, and it's their first of 5 online exclusive sets for 2025. What's really cool about this figure is that it's in the, what they're calling the Vortex Edition sort of style, which means basically it's done in the same style as the recent 15th Doctor figure, where it's like better articulation, better quality, more accessories. It's kind of more in line with stuff like the Star Wars Black Series, more kind of premium, high-end Doctor Who figures with more accessories that come with them. And obviously, this one includes, not only do you get the third Doctor, John Pertwee, but you also get one of the crystals, one of the maggots, and you get an electroplated version of the third Doctor's sonic screwdriver. Now, I have seen some people say that the price is a bit steep, and whilst I am sometimes one of those people who is inclined to agree with that, I think in this specific case, I think for a Doctor and a screwdriver of this quality and all these accessories as well, I think this is justifiable. I can understand why people would want them to do a version without the Sonic, because a lot of people would just want the figure. But at the same time, I think this is a really, really cool set. Obviously, it's based on his look from the Demons. The set comprises a brand new third Doctor figure with an electroplated sonic screwdriver. The higher specification Vortex Edition third Doctor comes with some of his iconic accessories. The figure now features an entirely new head sculpt based on his early appearances circa 1971. The figure is decorated in his costume specifically seen in the 1971 story The Demons. It makes use of higher specification decoration techniques on the head, as well as a greater degree of detailing on the jacket and paisley cravat. The removable cloak accessory features a metallicized satin purple lining and joins other accessories, the crystal of Kronos from the Time Monster and a giant maggot from the Green Death. Also included in the set is a full-size electroplated third Doctor sonic screwdriver. This style with bright electro painting has never been released before and features a different sound chip, updated neck decals, and the Sonic comes beautifully presented in open presentation box packaging and is perfect piece of memorabilia to add to any Doctor Who collection. So I did pick this up because what's really cool about it is they're basically doing higher spec versions of all the Doctors, which is something that we were hoping for when the 15th Doctor got announced. So if there are a few more of these, I hope there are, I hope this becomes a regular thing where, similarly to the collection box set, you know, every so often we'll get like a new high-spec quality Doctor figure to go into the collection. Obviously, they're starting off with Pertwee. Also interesting that it's actually him smiling, which we rarely see on the figures, especially of Pertwee, which is nice to see. But I'd love to see, for example, another 14th Doctor figure done in this style, maybe the coatless version. I think also be really cool to get. An updated 12th Doctor would be really nice to see. Same goes for the 11th Doctor as well. And like the accessories you could include with them would all be really fun. You know, you could give Capaldi his guitar, you could give 14, I don't know, the Salt. I'd love to see what they would do with like a higher spec kind of Tom Baker or Peter Davison. You know, there's a lot of stuff they could do with this, so I think this was really cool, and this was an instant order for me. Obviously, I understand for some people that price may look a bit steep, and I do understand that, but I think for what you're getting here, the quality of it, I think it is worth it. I have been pretty critical of Character in the past, and them kind of selling us stuff that just kind of feels like more of the same. However, in this case, given the fact that, you know, it is basically an all decked out figure, I think I can justify this, especially as it comes with a Sonic, which is, by the looks of things, way more accurate. Obviously, if you follow Sonic Screwdrivers at all, you'll know that they did the electroplating for the 15th Doctor Sonic, which I actually have here, which is basically the plating that makes it look more like actual brushed metal, which I think is really cool, and I'm glad that they're going back and adding that to other Sonic Screwdrivers. I'd love to see like an 11th Doctor Sonic re-released with kind of a more copper finish. I think that would be really nice. Potentially maybe, you know, a 10th Doctor Sonic as well. So very, very interesting stuff, and to be fair, I'm very excited for this. I just kind of hope that we get some stuff for this series, for the new era, that actually ties in alongside classic stuff as well. But hopefully that is the case. Finally though, on sadder news again, I want to end off with this. We recently had the news that Simon Fisher-Becker, who played Dorian in Doctor Who Series 6, passed away. On his Facebook page, his husband, Tony, announced that as of 2:50 this afternoon, Simon has passed away. I'll be keeping the account open for a while. I'm not sure at this point if I'll be posting again. Thank you. Very, very sad. Obviously, I have a lot of nostalgia for Series 6. Obviously, as you guys know, the Smith era was kind of my childhood era. So I remember Dorian a lot, and I remember laughing my head off at the fact that he was just a head in a box. I thought that was the funniest thing ever for a while as a kid. So I was really sad to hear this news. I've never had the pleasure of meeting Simon in person. I know he did do the convention circuit fairly regularly. I just never got around to it, unfortunately. But one thing I will say, and a lot of people have said this to me, is if you followed Simon on Facebook, he messaged everyone when it was their birthday, being like, happy birthday from me, which I just think is really sweet. He seems like a really lovely man, and he will be missed. So I just wanted to end on that, because I thought it was important to mention. But that about wraps up this video. If you did enjoy it, be sure to give it a like, comment down below your thoughts, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.